right, let's pray and start. Father, thank you for your kindness to us. I pray that you'd watch over this session of Q&A. We get committed to you in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so let me repeat what we said last week, where the Q&A will start with yesterday's sermon, and then we can work out from there. So yesterday's sermon, anything that you have questions about, great. And then if you want to follow up from the previous sermon, the first sermon, then we can expand out from that. So we'll just go for an hour, and I'll try to repeat the questions for the tape. All right. Anybody have any questions?
I'm not sure what you said.
I do have a question.
All right.
And this, I guess, had to do with, you mentioned that your dad had 3 rules for you, and
Yeah.
And one of them was don't disrespect
Your mother.
or obey, those types of things. And I guess maybe this is more for Nancy, but I was wondering, how does that work in terms of like the everyday? Because if you have those 3 overhead rules, but then for the mom, I feel like so much of my day is saying to my 3-year-old, don't step on your sister, don't do this. It just ends up, especially when they're really little, being kind of, there's a lot of the little rules. So how does that kind of tie in if you just have your 3 big rules, but then I'm giving a lot of little rules?
Right. You can, if you want.
You can
want me
start.
to?
Go ahead, start.
Well, those fall under the obeying.
Right.
So obedience, there's a lot of commands that come up during the day, but that falls under obedience, because I can remember saying, you're not getting disciplined for spilling the milk. You're getting disciplined because I told you not to touch the milk, and you did. So even if it hadn't spilled, that isn't the issue. So it's about obeying me. It's not about the thing in particular. It's about obedience. So I remember saying that a lot.
Okay.
And just while I'm there, really we avoided disciplining for spilled milk and broken things. And, unless it was disobedience. I told you not to stand on the counter, and you did, and things got broken, but that's not why we're spanking you.
So you always want to kick it up to the genus and not get caught in the species, right?
I never would have put it that way.
So, well, you telling me not to?
I'm just admiring that quick.
If what you have is, if you say, if you say to a 3-year-old, no playing with blocks in the living room, don't touch the coffee table, get your feet off the couch, take your shoes off at the door. Well, if you have a massive particular commands, they can overwhelm, and they can, within the space of 3 days, contradict one another, right? Because sometimes they're supposed to take their shoes off at the door, and other times they're just come across. So the issue is always up one level, right? So or take it up as far as you can take it up, so that you've minimized the number of things that you're telling them not to do. So I gave those 3 examples: no disobedience, no lying, no disrespect of your mother. But you might, I was probably 10 or so when my dad gave me that rule. A 3-year-old might be told no fussing, no fussing and whining. That's one category. Complaining, no disobedience. But the goal is simplify, and use the same vocabulary. So if you have 10 discipline instances and you can use the same word for all 10, you're teaching the principle.
Okay.
We even sometimes played the obedience game. Maybe you've done that. But it's just, okay, you all, let's practice. When I say to do something, I want to see you, right away, cheerful, and then just, could be silly things, but just practicing and just say, see, that's perfect. Sort of like last week we talked about when I'd be taking them with me to the grocery store, we would review the 3 rules about being in the grocery store, and they aced it. Well, there'd be gum usually at the end. So just practice and simple. He's got.
So
Yeah.
tying onto that question, we have a 3-year-old, and we're at that whole transition where now he's intelligent. He can do a lot of stuff. How do you transition them from very few rules don't touch the toilet, and, don't hit your sister, or whatever. How do you transition them to more maturity? Don't you have to increase the application, even if you still have 3 big categories, but you have to increase the application, and how do you do that without squelching? Just means there's a lot of things he can do wrong now.
Okay, yes, because he's, basically you've got increase, let me repeat the question. When kids get older, particularly boys, and let's say they're 3, and they're more mobile and they're more intelligent, don't you have to increase the mischievous? Don't you have to increase the number of rules in order to keep up? Well, the answer is you will never keep up, right? Disobedience can always expand at a more rapid rate than the rules, right? When Nate was just a little kid, one time Nancy got the pears down off the top of the fridge to can them or something, and found a bite out of each one. And we had never thought to make a rule against climbing on top of the fridge and taking a bite out of each
in the early hours of
in
the
the early
morning.
hours of the AM.
But we did not. I'm sure we did not discipline for that. I mean, it was
No, but
it was
yeah,
sort of funny.
it's sort of funny. There were a lot of things that were sort of funny.
Well,
But
that one really was funny.
So, if you say, okay, we want to govern by rules, they're like you said, mobile and intelligent and can get ahead of you. So what you want to do is cast a wide net, right? Now, you might, let's say, depending on how clever the child is, you might want to cast the net pretty wide. Don't do anything that will reduce your mother to tears. don't where you just say this, and you know what I'm talking about, right? So you basically, once you get into the regulatory agency mentality, then what you're going to do as the child becomes even more intelligent is you're going to produce what my dad called sea lawyers, where they not only can they get ahead of you, but they can argue their case after, you never told me not to play with the lawnmower, right? And that's true, you never did. Then it reduces to, if you didn't tell me not to, then I get to.
Okay.
So you really want categories that encompass.
And we would, for instance, with the pears, we probably had a little lesson, a little teaching about that. It's sort of like when number 3, when Rachel was an infant, I suddenly thought, it's quiet, where is Nate? And so I went zooming back, and he had lifted her out of the little bassinet, and she was on the edge of my bed. So so I talked to him. We had a little teaching time about it, but I didn't discipline him for it because, there was no rule about it. So I just talked to him about it. But then when he did it again the next day, now we've got clear-cut case of disobeying.
And it's not he's disciplined not for moving the baby.
For disobeying mother.
But it was for disobedience.
So then, to bring this to one more level, how do you avoid having a bunch of things that you're regularly demanding obedience for? Because you're still going to end up with patterns,
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we're always going to tell him he can't scream at the table in the middle of dinner. So you would discipline him for obeying, but it's kind of adding another thing. Is that just what you have to do? Because there are going to be a certain number of commands you're going to have to repeat throughout the day, even
Right.
if you just discipline for disobedience.
I would, and this is obviously, just so you know, we know that you've got this shifting story all the time, and it's a live action deal. So we know that it's complicated. But if you said, we've got a situation where no screaming at the dinner table or no screeching or whatever, I would far rather have a situation where you have one screech at the dinner table, you say, no, let's not do that. And then he does it again in his disobedience. Than to have a rule that you established 3 months ago, no screeching, no hitting, no this, no this, no this, no this. And then you've got this now you've got to keep minutes, and when did I tell you that, or was that your brother I told that, or it's that kind of thing. You want to keep life simple. Keep it simple for you, keep it simple for them.
That makes sense.
Right? And so I can afford one screech at the dinner table. Right? And I can say, no, let's not do that. And they do it again, which is the whole point of discipline, the whole point of disobedience from a child's perspective is control. The whole issue is mastery. Who is going to run this house? Me or you? And and it's not that they just screech or fuss or hit their sister in fits of absent-mindedness. It's oftentimes, what are you going to do about that? What are you going to do about that? And so if they screech or yell or throw a potato or something at the dinner table, and you say no, and all you have to do is say it once. You say no, and then they do it again, which is what they need to do in order for it to be about mastery. Right? If you tell them no and they comply, you won. They're learning that you're in charge. If you say no but they want to be in control, then they're going to do it again. They're going to push it, and then when you discipline them, it's for disobedience.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
So can I follow up on that though?
Yeah.
You tell them one night no, they scream again. The second time you spank them. The next night you give, would you suggest another warning, or is now the rule in place?
No, I would. The question is, if you say Wednesday night, don't do this, and then Thursday night they do it, is the rule in place? Is it a standing order like in the military? Is it a standing order, or is it renewed or refreshed?
Yeah.
I would prefer to refresh it, and the reason I would is it doesn't take that much time. It takes two seconds. You let them figure out the pattern, but you don't open up the door for them to say, but I forgot, or that wasn't, you didn't tell me that, I don't remember that. You're just creating opportunities for arguments. Mm-hmm. And so and the other thing is, if you read the book of Proverbs is a father writing to his son, and it's all about child rearing. And it's an older son, but it's a father to his son, and it's amazing how much repetition goes into it. When you have to repeat yourself, that's not a sign of system failure. It's I think God designed children to need to be told the same thing over and over and over again. And if it's done patiently, then everything happens. You keep the issue clear. I said not to do this, 15 seconds ago? You did it, and now let's discipline for disobedience. Mm-hmm. Rather than 24 hours gives them all kinds of maneuvering room, and they will take advantage of the maneuvering room.
The other strategy is just remember, no screeching tonight at the dinner table. As you're sitting down or before, just the reminders are.
Yeah, if you remember, that's a good point. If you remember that this is a pattern, then you can just say, like Nancy did going to the grocery store, I know what their temptations are at the grocery store. So I review with them right before we go in. So it's all fresh. It's not, I told you 3 weeks ago not to do this in the store, and then I blow up at you. But see, when that happens, parents need to be careful of their own sin too, because you might remember vividly telling them no screeching last week, but there were 2 meals they distinctly remember since then where they screeched and nothing happened.
Right.
Right? And then you blow up at them because you've got a headache, and you're just welcome to the world of inconsistency. So it's far, far better to renew everything. Okay, grocery store, here are our temptations. The dinner table, here are our temptations. Remember, and try to keep them simple, like 2 or 3 rules. Don't throw your knife.
Well, it's good for us. Okay, here I go. What are my temptations again? Heads up, everybody. It's just a good strategy for everybody.
Yes.
We are family by adoption, and we've had children come in all different ages, newborn from the hospital up to 11 years old. And so all of these strategies seem to fit really well with the younger children.
Mm-hmm.
How can we go about doing it with the older children when you're having to constantly redirect because there's been 10 or 11 years of really poor training?
Right. So the question is, if you have a family by adoption, and some of the kids have come as newborns, and some of the kids have come in as older children with an already established set of expectations, behavior patterns, habits, and so forth, how do you adjust to that, or how do you make room for that? I would say that you need to have give it time, and let everybody in the family know that you're giving it time and when the time is up. So we're not going to expect you just arrived and wham, you've got to unlearn everything in 24 hours. At the same time, you can't say your upbringing is going to hold us all hostage and we're going to turn our whole family over to the way you were brought up to this point. So we understand this is going to be very difficult. You're getting to know us, we're getting to know you, you're getting to know your siblings, all of that. And what we'd like to do is just give this a couple of months for us to get adjusted to each other, and we'll just remind you we'll remind you, and then you tell the other kids, we're reminding them because they're not used to this, and everybody sees that they're getting on board so at the end of this 2 months, everybody's going to have the same set of expectations in the family. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, also to add on to that, with the younger children, using a rod, as scripture indicates, seems more appropriate when they're just going to choose to do differently than what you're asking them to do. But when they're older,
Yes.
It just seems...
It seems awkward and weird and out of place. Yeah, so when you have
And it
older...
might have terrible connotations for someone, depending on their
Right,
background,
right.
and you may not want to go that route.
Yeah, so let me back up. The question has to do with disciplining or spanking older children, especially older children who just joined you. The first, even with your own kids, I didn't say this in the sermon, and probably ought to have, but my dad had for us the standard of, by the time the kids are 12 or 13, all done with spanking. Okay, and I'll explain that in a minute. And we had the same standard. We wanted 90% of the spankings that the kids received to occur in their first 5 years. And then maybe just an occasional course correction, you might say, through the elementary years. And by the time they're heading into junior high, we were wanting to be all done. And we moved to another form of discipline with the kids when they were older. And that was with our own children. With adopted children, you've got no telling what their experience is, what they associate with this. But even if they don't have any memories of abuse or anything like that, whenever you discipline a child, you are writing a check. Okay? And you need to have money in the bank to write the check. You can't, and I oftentimes explain to dads more than to moms that if, let's say, your daughter's 19 years old and she wants to go out with some schmo, and you say no, and you're writing a check for $100,000 by saying no, well, my first question is, do you have $100,000 in the bank? And I don't want you to give me a copy of my book proving to me that that's your checkbook or that's your address in the upper left-hand corner. I know that. You don't want to be like the guy who says, I can't be out of money. I still have checks left. So when you spank a child, it's a withdrawal. You're spanking them. You're hurting them. So is there enough emotional deposits, positive affirmations, and so forth in their life to enable you to do that to them? And so basically, let's say a spanking is $100. A spanking is $100, and this kid arrives in your house with 10 cents in the bank. These people must be nice. I heard they were Christians at the agency, and I've known, the house seems nice. And then wham. Well, you don't have the money in the account to to do that. So I would suggest a period of adjustment. And if you've got really older kids, like 11 or 12, that's about the time I'm looking at discontinuing corporal punishment anyway.
And then you would do what?
Okay. What you're doing is, thank you. So what would you do if you discontinue spankings at 12 or 13? What do you do after that? Well, when they're 12, they're 6 years away from joining the Navy and going off to the Philippines. Okay, so between 12 and 18, and when they're 18 and they've gone off to college or gone off somewhere else, they're not going to have to obey your curfew. They're not going to have to, so they're going to be out on their own. They're going to have to tackle the world by themselves. They're going to have to, and so your standards have to be internalized by that point. And so what you want to do is move from exoskeletal discipline in the early years to the internalization of the standards when the kids are in their teen years. So, and the way you do that is by allowing real life consequences as opposed to artificial consequences. So when a child is 3 and they disobey you and climb over the kid gate at the top of the stairs, you don't want them to learn their lesson via real life consequences, right? Because they might break their neck, they might, so the real life consequences of little kid folly can be, they could go play in the traffic, they could fall down the stairs, they could stick something in an electric socket, or real life consequences are dangerous. So what we do is we introduce little bite-sized artificial consequences. We discipline spankings or swats or swatting their hand, or spankings are tiny, manageable bits of pain that are disproportionate to what the world would do to them. So it's just little tiny things to teach them the principle. Disobedience means pain, but it's pain that doesn't cause their world to fall apart.
And it's acute, it's not chronic.
It's acute pain, and it's over, and you're forgiven, and it's done. If they fall down the stairs and break their neck, it's chronic pain. It's chronic pain. But when they're 12 to 18, that's a period where if they do something like this, if they steal from their employer, or if they disobey, they don't show up for work, they've got a paper route and they just don't do it, or something like that. When they do that when they're 25, there are real world consequences. And so what you're doing is you're phasing them into real-time, real-world consequences. So they break the neighbor's window, they pay for it. That's a real-life consequence. They don't show up for work, you have them go visit their employer, drive them over there, and they walk up to the door, seek their forgiveness for not showing. It's a real-world consequences. That's the kind of thing that you do. And so that's basically the short answer. You try to have it, and it's not full tilt real world consequences, but it's measured out, and it gets increasingly like the real world the older they get.
We had some visitors come once for dinner, and we had a great evening. They had little kids. I mean, it was a fun time, and their kids are about our kids' age, and everything was great. And about, half hour after they left, the doorbell rang, and here's the dad with his son, and the son came in, and he had, I had little tablecloth weights we'd eaten outside that hold, the wind keeps the tablecloth on. He had pinched a few of those, and I think that was what it was. And so his dad made him come in and say, "I'm a thief," and return it, and I think he had to pay us like a quarter or 35 cents or something. This was not because we levied that fine, but obviously. But his dad really wanted him to see this is a big deal, and you have to make restitution, seek forgiveness. He was not a very old kid. He's probably like 5, 6 age,
Yeah.
do you think? I don't know, 4, somewhere in there. I don't remember. But it just made an impression, like, that's a faithful dad. I mean, he's teaching him it's real world consequences, and it's not just getting a spanking, it's actually having to go put it right.
And the older they are, the more you should be looking for real life.
Should we expect because their maturity level, even though they've had, 10, 11, 12 years of another environment, with their maturity level just being older and being able to understand things logically a little quicker than younger children, should we expect that to be brought to speed?
Yeah, within a reasonable period. So the question is, should we expect them to get up to speed relatively quickly? Yes, because you're not doing them any favors by dragging it out. So you want to give them a reasonable amount of time to adjust, but not so much time in the world that they feel entitled to take their sweet time. Yes?
I don't know if this is directly concerned with defiance, and not necessarily in words, but, you spank the kid and they give you the look, if you know what I mean. That kind of, do you think that's the kind of thing that ought to be explicitly commanded and then spanked for again, and they later if they do it again, or how do you handle that?
Okay, the question is, if you have a negative reaction to a spanking, defiance, or flipping out, or
that didn't hurt.
Or that didn't hurt. Bring it, Dad.
Right.
If you have that sort of thing, then let me caution you against getting sucked into a whirlpool of spanking spiraling downward. Right? Because if that happens, what's going to happen is he's going to say, okay, I've got the upper hand.
Everybody loses.
Everybody loses, and he's going to say, I'm going to defy Dad again, and then you're going to have a next to impossible time spanking him 10 times in a row and not damaging him. I said in the sermon that spanking should sting and should hurt, but it ought not to be damaging. And if you get to the point where you have a bunch of spankings in a row and he's trying to throw down and you're trying to throw down, it's going to be awfully hard to stay out of that kind of thing where you're just clobbering the kid. So what you need to do is, if he spanks you, if he defies you when you spank him, and you think he's going to, and you note that, I would file that away for next time, right? And say, okay, clearly, when I spank him once, I'm not spanking him in such a way that he concludes after the first one, I don't ever want that to happen again. Right? So I believe that instead of having 10 spankings with 3 swats each, 30, it'd be far better to have 1 spanking with 10 swats.
Sure.
Right? And just say, okay, goes back to my previous point. This is all about mastery and control, And so you want to say, okay, let's have a showdown, but I'm going to win it decisively in the first round. You don't want to win anything in the 5th round. Now, I know that sometimes things will squirt away from you and you've got to do something. It's the sort of thing where you've got to do something. But wherever you can, keep it simple, keep it short, keep it over and done.
And you could even say, you sit here for a few minutes and I'll be back.
Yeah.
You just sit in here and wait, and I'll be back with some more wisdom in a minute. Just a timeout almost.
Sure.
But what was the other thing I was to say about the defiance? Sometimes kids don't have to cry. It's not like, they could take the spanking, and if they say that didn't even hurt, you could say, good job. Awesome. You're tough. Instead of that being, it depends on how it's said, but
Sure.
say, great.
The other thing, since we're talking about this, since we're talking about spanking, and since the American Academy of Pediatricians has declared any form of spanking, whatever, to be child abuse, the fact that we're talking about this sort of openly is going to, some people are just going to be aghast at. So the first thing is that I want to say is there is such a thing, obviously, as physical abuse of children, beating them up, spanking them stupidly, spanking them too roughly, spanking them too long, where you're damaging, and I regard that kind of thing as wicked. It's not just when parents lose their temper and they're beating their kids up, There really is, the fact that people call any form of spanking child abuse does not mean there's no such thing as child abuse. And it does not mean there's no such thing as child abuse in conservative Christian circles. Sometimes because the parents are abusers, and sometimes because the parents are just foolish and they don't know how to, they just get sucked into these things and don't know how to get out. And so the best way to do is you want the spankings to, you want the rules to be simple, you want the spankings to be the end of the world as far as the kids concerned, but the end of the world right now, over and done, rather than drawn out over an epic battle for 45 minutes. Yeah.
One thing I might just throw out as far as the actual mechanics of spanking goes is we found it to be more effective to use, we use a pancake flipper, it's got a big head on it, but something that you can get a bit of velocity but it's light. You get a really good sting without a good impact. And I like that a lot better than my hand because, you know, my hand is, I want that to be a loving thing, not a,
Right.
you know, a little jarring. So just, and the Bible does say rod, not.
Right. We never used our hands. I mean, we just would use like a little paint stirrer, just a little pop, pop, pop. It just stings. It doesn't.
Or a wooden spoon.
Little, yeah, but nothing, yeah.
And
something.
Another argument against using your hand, I think a hand is too heavy. It's too heavy and it's hitting as opposed to stinging. Also, if you don't know how to spank with your hand, you can hurt yourself as much as you hurt them. And the danger of that is if you hurt your hand and you're already on the brink of being mad, you know, some parents hurt themselves when they're spanking, and then they lose it, and then they wind up abusing the kid. So it's, and also what you said about the hand should be associated, I think, with care, protection, feeding, loving, not attacking.
Never the face. I mean, it's just, that's what the little bum is for. It's a little pop.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was just always done it was judicial, it was calm, it was, okay, you know you disobeyed, so you're going to get 2 little swats, or 2 swats, maybe they're big swats, depending on how big this kid is, but just keeping it calm. Now we'll pray together, I love you, it's forgiven, and we go back to playing.
Yeah.
Related to both things you said, there's a lot of antagonism towards spanking coming from Christians too, in my circle anyway. You know, the rod is not, it's not talking about a switch, it's talking about a giant thing that you beat on the back. It's never talking about the buttocks, it's talking about the back, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Would you respond to that? I mean, that's a very prominent argument going on constantly.
All right, so yes, I would, to repeat the question, there is an argument being mounted in Christian circles today that the rod, Proverbs says the rod is for the back of fools, not for the rear end of toddlers, right? So the use of the rod is, this, they say, is not talking about child rearing at all. And I'm prepared in most cases, to quite cheerfully grant it. And say, yeah, I think the rod is for the back of fools and not a switch for a toddler's rear end. But I would offer it, I would then take that as an a fortiori argument, a how much more argument. Because the people who are arguing against spanking toddlers for mischief, are they seriously arguing for corporal punishment for teenagers? Right? Is that what they're arguing for? Well, no. You know, if you did that, so if a teenager were brought down to the public square for the elders of the city to whack him, I remember there was a case in Singapore 10, 20 years ago. Yeah, where they came, and it was an international uproar over this sort of thing. Well, I believe that. I don't want to veer too far off, but let me just say a few outrageous things and come back. Everybody thinks that this sort of thing is brutal and inhumane and terrible, and what kind of Middle Ages dungeon did you crawl out of if you want to? Well, we're
What
this.
is it though you're talking about doing?
Corporal punishment for, let's say an 18-year-old juvenile delinquent. that Proverbs is talking about, who went joyriding in somebody's car and wrecked it, right? Well, I think in a more sane society, that's the kind of thing where he'd be flogged or he'd be beaten with a rod and released. Restitution is required. We have about 1 million people incarcerated in our dog kennel system of penitentiaries. There's about 1 million people locked up in these little things. And we pride ourselves on how humane we are. It's the most, it's demented and twisted, basically demented and twisted. And if you went through there and got all the kids who were there for some, joyride or wrote bad checks or first time pot possession or something like that, you went through and said, would you like to spend another 3 years in here, or would you like to get a flogging and be let go?
What do you mean by flogging? I just want you to define.
In Proverbs, a rod for the back of fools. So corporal punishment for grown-ups.
No,
right?
but flogging sounds like
Like
tearing the flesh off their back.
Not
So I'm
like
just wanting you to be clear.
Thank you.
It's just
Actually,
like a stick, beating them on the back with a stick or something?
yeah, but here's the
Putting them
thing.
in what's that called?
Stocks.
The stocks.
The stalks, right.
Here's the one of the things that you want to be careful of is this. In the passage that I quoted on Sunday from Hebrews, the Lord chasteneth every son he receives and scourges.
Right.
The word used there is scourge, flog. So God does that with his children. His children can get worked over. Now, I know that in the British Navy, the cat and tails, and the way Jesus was flogged was dehumanizing. And in the law, where it said 40 strokes was the limit, because otherwise, it says in Deuteronomy, your brother will be degraded in your eyes. You can't go beyond that. And we think, yikes, 39 times, that's pretty degrading. But the Bible says the rod for the back of fools. So if that's a rough justice kind of system, it really is a rough justice kind of system. But I believe it's better than what we have now, because we just drive by the penitentiaries and we don't know that they're in there. It's out of sight, out of mind. We don't know what we're doing. And so we feel very humane. And then we're scornful of the people who say, well, why don't you just make them pay restitution, give them 10 whacks, and let them go. Well, I think that's charitable. Now, having said that, so when you look at the world of Proverbs, where they had that kind of system of corporal punishment for juvenile delinquents or for rowdies or for hoodlums, how much more would that kind of society accept a judicious application of a mini rod to a mini person? Right? It just makes good sense. So I grant the argument that people make that this is talking about older. Many of the passages are talking about older.
And you don't think little babies should get it anyway.
Right.
It's ridiculous.
Yes. That's the other thing is, I think SWATs should generally begin after the child is mobile and can get into things. Right. And occasionally you might need a flick or something like that. If a nursing baby is biting or something, that you might need to do that, but it should
Although
be very.
sometimes they go on hunger strikes when that happens.
Yeah.
That even is, even if it's just a little gentle thing, like no biting, it's
Yeah.
little things.
One other thing, Nancy mentioned this in passing, and I would say that a child ought never to be struck on the face, because that's that's where we bear I think the image of God.
Or the shaking, or the
We bear the image of God most clearly in the face, and if spanking can be, a child can distinguish rejection of my behavior from rejection of me. But if you strike them in the face, it's really hard, almost impossible for them not to take it as a rejection of them as a person, as an individual. Yeah.
So, on the comment that you made this past Sunday, and you made it in the past. In the garden, there was one no and lots of yeses.
Right.
At the same time, there's a point at which there's maturity, and there's more required of them too. Much is given, much is required of your child, or more at least. What about the question of teaching boys to sit still in church, or sit still, at the dinner table? Anytime that they're supposed to be quiet, because you see some families and you're thinking, how do they do that? I look at my little boy, he's just moving constantly. And I get him to sit pretty still for a while, and then 15 minutes goes up and
Mm-hmm. Well, here, the question is, how do you get a boy particularly to sit still for extended periods of time?
and when?
Well, and when do you start, you mean?
Yes.
Okay, you said he's 3, right? I think you should be working on it now. But I wouldn't expect instant results, and results may vary. So when you look at families around the church and they've got 5 kids in a row sitting there, holding their psalters, I can tell you, I bet you if you go to those families, every one of them could tell you war stories about the years it took to get to that point.
Also, though, your oldest is the one, you're just establishing this culture. And so in the bigger families, all these little ones, they're born into this culture's already established. So it's a lot easier for them to fit in. And when you've got just the first one getting started. The other thing is, one time Betsy, Doug's mom, told me that during devotions at their table, that the boys would be under the table. And Jim would be asking questions, and out would come the right answer from under there, and she'd think they are not paying attention. But they were.
So basically, sitting still for school, for church, for the dinner table is a hard thing for boys to learn, and they need to practice. Make it a game, make it a competition, preparing them. I know some families have done church practice sit still for 10 minutes. And don't make them sit still for an hour and a half, but sit still for 10 minutes and make it a game, and then let them go play, and just get them used to the idea so that they know what it means, they know what the vocabulary word means. Quiet, sit still, they know.
Sure.
And give them other things to do quietly. So if they let them grow into attentiveness at church. So we do those coloring sheets for kids to color that's connected somehow to the service, because we don't expect the children to pay rapt attention to.
Or to sit like stones.
Another boy-related question. Boy seems way more impulsive than my daughters, just eons more. And tell them not to be gentle with the girls or love the sisters. That's the general rule. 5 times in a row doesn't do it. It's spanking each time or whatever. How do you adapt to testosterone?
Right. So you said boys generally are much more impulsive than girls, which is true. Boys tend to be ruled by their passions more than girls. And this is why oftentimes the boys' misbehavior is just out there. You can just see it. And the girls are just as sinful, but they're sneaky and manipulative, and they work the system. And the boys' disobedience is high and inside. So what do you do about that? Well, one of the things you do, especially when you're talking about roughhousing with sisters or mistreating sisters, and this is something we've seen in our kids teaching our grandkids, and this is something that boys respond very well to. When you hurt your sister, when you hit your sister, you are being a dragon. And boys were given by God. God gave boys to families to fight dragons, not to be dragons. Right? So if you correct your boy for being a dragon, for attacking a sister, for being the kind of person that your sister needs protection from, she is in a world where she needs to be protected. She needs a protector, and you're supposed to be that. And boys are wired to want to be saviors, small s saviors. They're wired to want to be St. George. They're wired to want to be the one who delivers. And I think that correction would resonate with boys. I don't want to be the dragon. I never want to be the dragon.
The
Yeah.
girl question then.
Okay.
So we deal with the fussiness and and it's, I don't know, I mean, it's hard to deal with because, like you said, it's sneaky and manipulative, and so I don't know. And it doesn't seem like we're making a lot of headway. She still, gets into these fussy things, and I don't know. What advice do you have on that?
All right. Let me repeat the question. Maybe Nancy, you can tell some stories about what Rachel
Okay.
does. But what Rachel does with Blair, because we've been amazed at some of the things our children have come up with in dealing with this. But the question is, if a girl is mopey or whiny or fussy, trying to manipulate or nag or get her way through, on a war of attrition or something like that, how do you deal with a girl who's not defiant? Boys tend to be passion-ruled and defiant. Girls are in it for the long game. They can wear you down. How do you deal with that? And you were just telling me
I
a story
just
the
told
other
Doug
day.
a story because I think it was yesterday.
Yeah.
Rachel was getting Blair ready to go out the door, and Blair started fussing. She wanted something, and Rachel had already said, "You can't have it." Blair's 3, I think. Yeah. And so Blair started, "I want to," she started to do that again, and Rachel said, "Blair," I said, "No. So you have to control your heart. Show me how you control your heart. Show me what you do." Because she's trained her. She's taught. This is not new information. This is practiced. She goes. She said, "That's right. Okay, so let's do that again. Show me how you're controlling your heart." And so I'm just watching this, and I said, "Blair, that's so good because we want strong women. We don't want weaklings in this family. Control your heart." So it's not okay, she did it again. We're down to get spanked. It's more just giving them opportunity to correct themselves.
And
That takes a lot of practice.
And there's an important truth in there, because if a girl is fussing, and the same thing applies to a boy, but if the child is disobedient and you come down on them like a rock pile, bam, they're learning, I'm the weak one. My parent is the strong one, I'm the weak one. As opposed to what happened there is where she was being taught to be the strong one, right? So self-control is the beginning of all strength, right? And so you should talk to your daughter and say, we want you to be a strong woman of God, not a weak woman of God, and a woman who listens to her heart, who listens to herself instead of talks to herself, is just flighty and driven by everything, and we don't want you to be that kind of woman. And don't begrudge repetition.
And if you do that little thing, and then like if Blair had just thrown down and just said, not going to do it, then they would have had to go back and had a discussion privately. But as it was, she just gave her a couple of opportunities, like, well, that's a good start. Let's see, you can do better than that, and let's see it.
So I guess going off of that, like in terms of repetition, if she comes in and asks for water in a whiny voice, and I say, try that again in a cheerful voice, and we
Right.
get it that time. And
Yeah.
then 10 minutes later, she comes in and asks for something else in a whiny voice, and I'm saying,
Yep.
try that again.
Yeah.
So it's not me.
I would add one more thing. So the question is, if you say try that again and she does it again, I would add one more thing, and that is make her go out of the room and come back in and try it again. So you're tying more of a flag onto it.
Yeah.
If she asks in a whiny voice and you say that, no, I'm not going to give it to you, ask it again, and she cleans it up seconds later, that's I got my dig in and I got what I wanted. But if you say, okay, that didn't work, that's not how we do. Why don't you go down the hall, all the way down the hall, I want you to touch the closet knob and then come back in, and make it fun. Okay, and come back in and try it again, and give her a few moments to compose herself, and she has to come in and do it right. the second time and make it more of a deal, her having to ask again. But it's close enough that you'll give it to her if she asks the right way.
Doug said that kids need the repetition. I think we do too. God must think we need to repeat ourselves a lot. So it's just good for our souls to have to go through it again and again. And
I have a question off of your story you just told about Rachel. It
Yeah.
sounded like she told her, and after she first fussed, and then she fussed again, and then she made her train that. And I like that. I like how she wanted her practice to be strong, but it almost sounds not consistent. And we've been told by our parents and some of your teaching,
right.
consistency is important. So how do you make that work so that you can give them a chance in a way
Right.
to practice and to do it right
Yeah.
and to correct themselves, but you're not giving them lots of chances and they're
Right.
spanking.
Right. Okay, the question is how many chances is before it's inconsistency?
9.5, 9 3/4.
Well, that's me.
You know what? It takes wisdom, and so we can't be wooden about it and say, "Oh, I can't," because I already gave her one chance. It's just,
So it's fine to give them a couple chances.
Well,
if
with
that
this-
means they're
Sometimes.
practicing
yeah,
or
sometimes, but maybe not always. But in this
Right.
little scenario I'm describing, it wasn't like chances so much as just teaching. Come on, let me
She
see
was
you.
ready to
You can do this, yeah,
Okay.
and just
And if she'd refused,
Yeah,
then
then-
it's discipline.
Right.
And it's discipline for disobedience.
not for fussing,
Not for fussing.
Okay.
for disobeying.
Okay.
So so then if we can connect that to the Standing on Their Promises book, it was when you gave the illustration of, okay, the family realizes they haven't been disciplining and they need to.
The reign of terror.
Yeah, you mentioned
Yeah.
start with the whining, which sounds a little like the opposite of what you just said here.
Well, that was for special occasions, because sometimes we would talk in the evening and I would say everything has just gotten sort of muddled. Like we're not having real clear, clean lines, and I'm muddled and I don't know where to start. So we would just have a conference about it, the two of us, and then Doug would say, well, I think what we should do is have what we call this reign of terror. We'll just tell the kids, okay, today, first fuss or squabble. It was usually squabbling with each other. It wasn't fussing. It was just getting on each other, just squabbles or something.
Yeah.
We say no warnings. It's just going to be.
So the the zero tolerance reign of terror thing that we did from time to time was a special time of a day or so where everything had gotten raggedy and loose, and we realized that, okay, we need to cinch it up tight. But we'd explain everything to the kids ahead of time.
And these were like 4 to 8-year-old kids. They weren't babies or toddlers. I mean, these were old enough to know better.
Yeah, so we'd explain it. So if this happens, we're just gonna land on it right away.
We hardly
And-
ever had to.
And
Do it.
usually the talk
Did it?
usually the talk did it. So, but it's when things are generally not raggedy, and your mom's just leaving to get in the car, and a child fusses, you don't have to turn that into a federal court case, but you shouldn't ignore it either. So you should call it, identify it, and say, no, that's not what we do, right? You show me your happy face. Show me your yes, mom face. And you need to have it right away. And if you get it, then you're done. If you don't get it, then you're not going to leave as soon as you thought you were going to.
So in other words, the zero tolerance approach, that's not constant, in a sense. You're not running every single day. Well, I mean, maybe for a child who continually touches the dishwasher every day where the knives are, every single day you're reminding him and then getting him.
Right.
When he's really little.
Right.
Like you're saying, more spankings then.
Yeah. There should be more spankings earlier.
Or shut the dishwasher.
Yeah.
Or move him away. Or,
Yeah. Or put the kitchen off limits. Or, there are different things. So always push in the direction of simplify. And so the zero tolerance is necessary to get things up to an acceptable level. And for us, acceptable level includes, no, I don't want you to do that. There was some sort of sin there. You call it, and I believe you have to get instant compliance as soon as you've spoken to it.
Okay.
Right? And this goes back to the rule. I don't expect them to remember a rule from 3 days ago. So I speak to it, and I want compliance right away. So it's always zero tolerance that way.
Okay, so if you have a 5-year-old and you say, okay, you just open the door, I said shut it, or I said keep the door closed, so go close the door, and then the child runs off in the direction.
Right.
And that's where you
Correct.
say, okay,
Yeah.
you just disobeyed me, you get a spank.
Right.
But you're not saying, keep this door closed and they open on accident, or sometimes
Right.
haul them every single day.
Correct.
And what Doug said last week about limit the commands, it'd be better, or whenever you said that, be better to give fewer commands and get 100%.
Compliance.
Yeah.
So reduce the commands by 90% and get 100% compliance on 10%. Then get compliance on 20% and 80% ignored. That's just confusing. Okay, time for one more question. If you got one.
Can I elaborate on the girl question?
Yeah.
So, we've talked with Rachel, and we do a lot of those kind of things.
Good.
So, sometimes though, or often, it's a fussy correction, all, hours. I mean, at what point do you say, okay, you're done fussing, we're gonna spank you? I mean, is that inappropriate at some point to say, next time you fuss, I'm just gonna spank you because this...
You're clearly asking for one.
It just
Yeah.
feels like a
It's like a game.
Mood.
She when we ask her to be cheerful, she will, and then she gets what she wants, and then she'll be fussy again the next time, or for no reason, whatever. I mean, is that a reasonable approach, you think, to say, after a few times of that, say, okay, next time you're fussy, I'm just going to give you a spanking, and that's your last warning?
So the question is, suppose you've got a whole evening from dinner till bedtime is just 28 fusses, right? Is that what you're talking about?
But when you say, try and ask cheerfully, or show me your cheerful face, she'll comply and do it. But then, as soon as that moment's over,
obviously skin deep.
yeah,
Okay.
it's back to being fussy.
What I would do is say, get the compliance that time, and then after you've seen this happen a couple times, you know what you're in for. So when you give her what she wants after she's shown you her happy face, and then you say, now, we know that you're going to be back here in 10 minutes fussing about something, right? And you can make a game out of it. You can just say it. And so oftentimes kids will say, yeah, yeah, I know, Dad. Yeah, that's what we do, right? And so you may not do that. We're all done with the fussing for the evening. Now sometimes I think a spanking is appropriate, because sometimes what happens is kids will do that not because they're trying to get what they want, but because they are consumed with guilt. Right? They've got a backlog of unconfessed sin, and they can't function in a godly way. And a spanking done right would cleanse, just clear the air.
It often does, yes.
Right. So one of the things you want to do is ask, is this an accumulated backlog of unconfessed sin that a spanking would clear up? If so, give the spanking. Sometimes it might be, we don't want to give too much credence to the all-purpose excuse, she didn't get her nap today. But sometimes she didn't get her nap today, and she got a pretty thin lunch, and she's fried and out doing. It might be just time for bath and bed.
Right.
45 minutes early. That's the sort of thing you do. Just head it off if you can. Try to avoid it if you can. But sometimes you'll say, okay, I think she's asking. I remember one time with Becca. She was a little toddler, and she was just walking the line all the time. And Nancy and I talked. It was very clear to us that she was looking for a spanking, and because she wanted to be clean, and so we said, all right, let's just wait till
Draw a line and make.
just draw a line and wait till she puts her toe across it. And so she did. We spanked her, and she turned into a ray of sunshine.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Dramatic.
She was liberated and free, and the guilt was gone, and it was relief, and it was just it was quite striking. So,
But you were only spanking for that offense. I mean,
For the
or did-
one, we drew some line because we just thought she's just walking the line. She's unhappy. She wants a spanking, but we're not going to just give her a random spanking.
Right.
So we needed some offense.
So we,
So-
yeah,
But that cleared up all of
It
the
just
backlog
cleared
anyway,
it.
even though
Yes.
that wasn't necessarily addressed specifically.
Correct.
right. And the other thing is just, I've sort of said this before, but teaching and praying with her. We're praying that you're going to quit being a fussy, and encourage her in the morning. This is what God says. Cheerful hearts, and fussing He doesn't like, and just so you're not just correcting, but teaching, bringing her along that way, and praying with her for it.
Let me finish with that. Just a quick statement of the liturgy of spanking. I think the liturgy ought to be: you've given a command. You go to the bedroom or go to wherever the spanking. The Merkels had a room in one of their early houses called Cyprus. The kids had to go to Cyprus. So
You had to go to the basement.
I had to go to the basement when I was a kid. So you have a clear infraction. Let's go. And so you go to the place. If you're adjudicating something that came to you, a squabble out of the backyard, and you didn't see it, then you have to there has to be Proverbs 18:17. One man's case seems reasonable until you hear the other side. So you give an opportunity for the defense. But if you saw it with your own eyes, then you explain, this is what the infraction, this is what I'm spanking you for. I'm spanking you for disobedience, or I'm spanking you for lying to your mother, or this is what I'm spanking you for. And then you explain the offense, then spank, and then hold them until they're done crying, and then pray with them and tell them it's completely forgiven. It's as though you've never done anything wrong. As far as we're concerned, everything's clean, everything's good. And come on, let's go. And if they're sulky, then you can leave them there until they're prepared to come out. But I wouldn't let that escalate into another round. I would address defiance, but I wouldn't if they're just still a little bit unhappy, I'd give them time to readjust. Okay? Well, thank you so much. Let's pray. Father, thank you for our time here tonight. We commit this to you, and we pray that you bless all the little children that are represented here. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.